I am back. Welcome aboard the Writer Talks. It is that time of the year where parts of North India continues to be singed by the sun, while those in the southern states are deeply gorging on their mangoes, watching monsoon showers. Across the world, it is a lovely summer season and holidays. So it surely is the perfect time for summertime reading to catch up on all the pending reading, whether you're on a holiday or you're enjoying the peace and quiet at home. I have an amazing recommendation for you today. Embark on another adventure with the young erudite espion, Simone Lafray, whom you know from the first book, Simone Lafray and the Chocolatiers Ball. The second book from the stables of Steve O Farrell is out, and it is set in London. Simone Lafray and the Red Wolves of London is already making headlines with umpteen accolades. It has already won the LitPick Top Choice Book Review Award, Literary Titan Gold Book Award and 5 stars, and a mounting pile of 5-star reviews from multiple review agencies. In this latest adventure that unfolds in London, Simone has new friends alongside the wheel. She stays in a boarding school, joins her father in the grand opening of their new patisserie in London, where the guest list includes, you guessed it right, the Queen. There are multiple moments of daring action, suspense, and adventures, new secrets that Simone unravels about La Volparossa, Red Fox, while going through the angst and heartbreaks that accompany teenage years. Though it is classified young adult fiction, it is a great read across age groups, and Steve, in his inimitable style, courses through the London landscape with aplomb. Joining me back on the Writer Talks today, Steve discusses his favorite amongst new characters, the books he is currently working on, and reveals the location for Simone's action in Book 3. So let's dive in and watch the spectacular Steve O Farrell. But before that, please do like, share, and subscribe to the Writer Talks. Let us continue supporting, encouraging, reading, and interacting with brilliant writers from across the world. June is also the Pride Month, and if you're in the mood for some self-discovery and life lessons in resilience, do pick up a copy of my debut novel, It Must Have Been Love, But. Until next time, smile, read, relax, and repeat. Ahoy! Ahoy! Welcome to the Writer Talks. Joining me today is the enormously successful writer of the Simone Lafray series, Steve O Farrell. Ahoy, Steve!
Hello, Asha. How are you?
I'm good. Welcome back to the Writer Talks. How are you feeling? Book 2, an immensely successful one again.
Yeah, book number 2 is out. Very excited to have it out and people reading it and starting to get feedback, which is always, fantastic. It goes through that whole process of swimming through your editors and maybe some beta readers and stuff like that. But once you get it out to your target audience and they really start to absorb it, and then you get feedback from that, that's always, the best, measure of accomplishing what you set out to do, which is, write another good book, and the second book in the series, which is also a challenge. So, everything is good in Simone's world, and working on the third one.
Fantastic, fantastic. Now, what was the first thought, or what was your first thought in a specific way when you started writing Simone and Red Wolves of London?
Right. So when I started doing it, started writing the second book, it was supposed to go in a different direction. I came to this choice of, am I going to write sort of a one-off book that was sort of her own adventure and didn't really stick to the main, the big overarching story with the fox and all that stuff. It was basically designed to sort of show what her abilities were and how clever she was and stuff. Or the other one was to jump into the overriding big story or some combination thereof. And after some time with the first one, I decided to move on and sort of do a little bit of a hybrid between the two, but mostly to jump into a story arc that connected with the bigger one in a more pronounced way doing it. So the initial thought was, one, I got to get started, because at some point, you can't just keep thinking about these things. You got to get started on it. And two, I had to have a thoughtfulness of laying it out to maximize my time, because I've said before, I'm not a full-time writer. So maximizing my time and sort of thinking through all the complexities of the summary that I had done and also the outline as well. But the initial thought was just to get going, maximize my time, do the best that I can through it, and hopefully once you go back and read that first draft, it's not quite as bad as you thought it would be.
Fair enough. Now, did you anticipate the huge success that you have received for your second book as well?
Well, I don't know that you ever anticipate success. It's always good to have it. I think when you write it, when you're a writer, if you just you're satisfied with the work and you're satisfied with the whole experience of bringing these things to life. If your audience is excited about it, or if it takes off in other directions, that's always great. But largely, those things are out of my hands. I always say I'm just the writer. I try to stay true to the story and true to the characters. And if it takes off in certain directions, which it appears to be, that's fantastic, because you want as many people to read it as possible, and hopefully enjoy it. So it's good to have a book where people are reading it, for sure.
Absolutely, it is always very inspiring and motivating. I think more than anything else when the book is well received.
It is, and as I've said, what's interesting to me is as I go into do talks in schools, or I talk to groups of kids that have read the book, that they care about these characters. They want to know what's going to happen to them. Are they going to be okay? What's going to be next? And to write a character that feels like they're alive to somebody is really, sometimes it feels kind of weird, because you feel this responsibility or this stewardship over these characters to live up to those expectations, and it can be a little unsettling. But then you kind of go back to your original instincts on them to push the stories that are coming forward, and you just trust that you're going to do your best, and hopefully everybody will be satisfied with the way that the characters are being written.
Fair enough. I can see the lovely cover in the backdrop. Yeah, absolutely. You worked with the same cover designer, the one who worked for the previous one?
Yeah, same illustrator. We had some ideas for the book. Of course, she's going to do some globe trotting now, so she's going to move around the globe. And we want to, in the designs, we want to make sure that the readers immediately, get a setting. They know place and character and all that kind of good stuff. And London, of course, is my favorite. The Big Ben, and then
and the red bus,
the bus, and the flag, and all these good things. So much like Paris, it's iconic in a lot of the landmarks there. So we had to add those in to give it a time and place. And also, it's also getting later in the evening. The first book, Chocolatiers Ball, is at dusk, and then this one's at, I forget what the time of the clock is, but I think
it's also around dusk, isn't it? Right? Yeah.
That's right. So hopefully the next, or if we do it the way we intend to do it, the next one, the next cover will be at dawn.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah, we're going to try to do the whole day. So
right.
with 6 or 7 books, that is the goal. We'll see how clever we can get with it, but that's what we're going with.
Yeah, amen to that. And I'm sure all of them will be equally well received.
Yeah, I hope so. That would be great.
So we'll continue talking about your book and Simone, lots more. But let's first dive into the rapid response section. You already know what the rapid response section is, so I'm not going to explain that. Ready?
Go. Yep, ready.
Great. So the first question is slightly tricky. So here we go. So between Simone Lafray and the Chocolatiers Ball and Simone Lafray and the Red Wolves of London, which one gave you a greater sense of creative accomplishment?
That's kind of a loaded question, because my answer right now is Red Wolves of London. And the reason would be because after writing the first book, you feel like you have some ability and some level of sort of literary fitness to move these things forward. And you can sort of flex those muscles a little bit more in the second book. Second books are traditionally very difficult to write, which I found out in this one. But I would say in terms of being able to finish it the way that I finished it, I would say in terms of creative, it's hard not to love your first book because you spend so much time on it. But today, I would say Red Rules of War.
Lovely. Thanks for that. Very honest answer. So moving on to the second one. Between London and Paris, which of the two cities was it harder for you to base the action in terms of setting, discussing the details, and basically entrenching the action? Which of the two cities was it more difficult?
For me, the more difficult one was London. Paris, when I first started to research it online, the visuals are great. There's so many landmarks and there's so much beauty to it and art that it seemed that as a writer, I had more license to expand in a couple of different ways, and it would seem plausible. When you think of London, you often think of, fogged in and the weather's not great. And from a writer's standpoint, most of that action would seem to be subdued a little bit. They're not all sunny days and all, that kind of stuff. So to me, it was a little more daunting to write London. I had to do a lot more research because once I actually went on the Google Maps and tried to get some sense of geography for it, it wasn't quite how I had anticipated it. So that was definitely more difficult to write with London in terms of the setting. Yes.
Right. Okay. Now you've been getting a lot of accolades. So between 5-star reviews and the multiple awards that you've been getting, which excites you the most?
Well, that's another trick question because they're both great. So it's like an A and a B. The 5-star reviews to me are especially great because generally somebody has really digested the book and they've taken the time to write, a narrative, which they don't have to do. It's somebody that just read the book, feels like they want to share some words about it, and they go through the process of writing, which is not easy. You have to be succinct in what you're doing and thoughtful. And the 5-star reviews are fantastic. And the other reason that I really like those, they come with a little more regularity than the awards, because awards only come out once a year or something like that. So you really have to wait. So the counterbalance to that is when you do win an award, it's a really big sense of occasion. So it's tricky to say, which one is better. They're both pretty good, I must admit.
Okay, but ideally, I will let you go with that. Ideally, I would insist on choosing one, but I understand in this case it's harder.
That's right, and especially the ones that I really love is when you see a child write a 5-star.
Right.
And you can tell by the way they're written, but they tend to have a little more enthusiasm to them. But those are great. Those always make with it.
Fair enough. Okay, now here's the next question. Between Franklin Dixon, writer of the Hardy Boys series, and Enid Blyton, writer of the Famous Five series, if you're given a chance, which one would you curl up with?
I remember reading the Hardy Boys more as a child. I remember my elementary school library. For some reason, I remember that row of Hardy Boy mysteries, and they were always out, or so you had to like grab one, and they always had sort of interesting covers, and there was a lot of action to them, and the mysteries were pretty good as well. But I always gravitated to those. I remember the Fabulous Five a little bit. I think they were written in the 40s or 50s, maybe prior to Hardy Boys. So I have a little bit of familiarity with those, but Hardy Boys, I would say.
Fair enough. Okay, this one is hypothetical. So, if you had the chance, who would you want Simone to meet with and take tips from? Sherlock Holmes or Hercule Poirot?
Right, so that's another one. So two detectives. That's a pretty good one because both of them have a pretty good depth of knowledge. I think she could probably benefit from either. Both are logical in the way they derive their things as well. That would be a really tough one. I would tend to lean towards Sherlock a little bit, but that would be a tough one. I said in another interview, the one character I would interject into the story just to see how it went would be Inspector Clouseau from the Pink Panther movies, because being a comedy and all that. I could see, that being interested, as it is so counter to Simone's need for order. I could see something interesting happening there. But I think, in terms of sitting down at the table and comparing notes, I would tend to lean towards Shaw.
Fair enough. Okay, this is the last one, the last question.
Okay.
Again, possibly tricky. Now, for you as a writer, whom would you prefer? Is it the V or Maeve? Who do you think is a better companion for Simone?
Right. So Maeve is a new character in Red Wolves of London. V has been Simone's lifelong friend. So there's a lot of history there. I won't give away too many spoilers in the book, but there's some complications in this book, and we'll see. I mean, you got to read it to see how it all works out. But the V is the long-term friend. Although Maeve, I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but she's not done for the series, and I think in terms of her friendship with Simone, she offers a different type of friendship. Which we all need different types of friends, that give us different experiences and things like that. So Maeve is certainly part of the puzzle, but if you pick one, it would be the me.
Right, fair enough. Thank you so much for being such a sport, Steve.
Oh, sure.
Right. Now, returning to Red Wolves of London. Now, after writing these two hugely successful books in the series, which in itself is a marvelous achievement, I read that the more recent awards that you've got have been the LitPick Top Choice Award and Book Review, and the Literary Titan Gold Book Award and 5 stars. Could you tell us a little more about these awards? When and how did you receive these?
Right. So the book gets submitted to different awards groupings and some things that guess are online. It also gets submitted to some other things that transpire through the year. One, to give it some exposure, to give it some possible reviews, things like that. And with awards, you never know. There are sometimes, judging books, especially in these broad categories, is so subjective. And I think it's, if you have a book that, just gets recognized for the quality of it, that alone is the accomplishment. But if you get, singled out by LitPick or Reader's Choice or, one of these other ones that's out there, Moonbeam or one of these, that's fantastic, because then you're sort of being judged among your peers by people that read books all the time. So they have a really good sense of, what the quality of the book is. Is it in genre? Does it meet the target audience? All those types of things. So, once in a while, there's, it gets read by the person that interprets it in a certain way that's favorable to others, and sometimes it doesn't. As I said in the first time we did our interview, not everyone's going to like your book. I mean, there are some of those people out there that'll give you, a 1 star, and you just shake your head and think, how could it be just 1? But, if that's how they feel, that's how they feel, and it's art, and they can interpret it in any way they would like.
True. Yeah, I'd say it has its merits and demerits, I guess, and I think that's also part of the deal, isn't it?
Yeah. It's part of the whole thing. It's part of the marketing. It's part of just getting the word out there, having it on as many platforms as possible. So, it's something that we're going to continue to do, and hopefully, we fall towards the higher end of some of these over the next year or so. But no, it's always exciting to win an award, for sure. I mean, to be award winning is something you can put in your credits and stuff like that. So, it's a nice part of the puzzle, for sure.
Right. Now, considering that the Simone Lafray series has been so very popular, so very well received, was there any one thing that you were very cautious about when you started writing Red Wolves of London?
Yeah, there were a couple things. One of the critiques of the first book, which in my mind, every time I heard this, I thought, well, you have to keep it in context of the whole series, because it's not just one book, it's a series. One of the critiques of the first one was, it was a little short, and it was only 140 pages or something like that. And it had some low action in it. It was a little slow to get going, and a lot of middle grade now, the way that it's written, it usually jumps right into an action scene where there's heavy action in the first couple of pages to sort of get the reader interested in it. You know, something outrageous happens, or something, you know, bigger than life happens, some action scene or something. And then it sort of goes on a roller coaster, where my books tend to follow that hero's journey structure, which goes up and then it builds to the climax, and then you have your falling action. So it's more classic in the way that they're written. But when I wrote this, when I started Red Wolves, I did want to have more higher action spots in it, which fit well because now that the first book had been written and come out, a lot of that groundwork had been conveyed to the reader already. So then I could jump into the action, and I didn't have to explain, you know, why someone might be doing something, or, you know, things like that. It was, you always sort of presume that. And the trick of it was with there's a lot of complexity of the nuance of second books. It's tough because you want to write it so that they don't really have to have read the first book to enjoy it. I mean, hopefully, if you read the first book, you want to go back and read. I mean, if you read the second book, you want to go back and read the first one, you know, just to fill all that in. But it was tricky, so I wanted to get more higher action in it, a longer narrative. The stakes had to be a little bit higher, and it had to move around more. That was part of, you know, the difference between a first book and a second book. The first book is only in Paris, and it's only in a couple different locations, so the world has to expand. So yeah, there were quite a few things that sort of naturally came together in the second book that were, I guess, criticisms or critiques of the first book that naturally sort of worked themselves out because it was time for her to, you know, expand her world and her life and all those things, and you don't have to explain a lot of things at the starting. And so it dovetailed nice. All of those criticisms sort of dovetailed nicely into the second book to give me some things to think about, which you know, I did. So it was helpful for sure.
Yes, I noticed the two parallel plots, they blend in so well, and then as you said, there were multiple moments of peak action, suspense, and drama on the personal front, and of course the kind of saving that she has to do at the end of the day. So they all came in together, and I think the suspense was very well handled multiple times.
Oh, well, thank you. And not only just raising sort of the action, but raising the emotional action as well. You know, the feelings are a little deeper. You know, she's starting to get at that point of her life where she's starting to second think things, and she's starting to question where her loyalties are, and you know, that gives you a little bit more to work with. But you have to have those balances. It can't just all be, you know, action, you know, running around and, you know, jumping off of stuff. There has to be sort of those emotional calisthenics in there as well that add to the fabric of the whole thing.
Right. And I think you've also introduced some really interesting new and fresh characters who aid Simone's adventure and detective work. I think characters like Jills, Maeve, Claire, and definitely Sugars. Very interesting. She appears briefly, but then surely leaves a mark as an adult. Now, how did you conceptualize these characters?
Well, the characters, when I typically write these, I don't name the characters for a while. I'll give them a name just so there's something, you know, to go into the text. But then I think about the names for a while. And what happened in this one, I like character development. I'm not a huge fan of world building, but I like character development. And I tend to add in a lot of characters, or at least now I do. In the first book, I felt that there was a good balance of characters because it was primarily at her house and the patisserie and stuff like that. And if I would have added more, and it would have seemed crowded to some extent. But now that she's you know, out and about, you know, in everyone's world, there's more characters. There's more people out there. So I had to be mindful of developing characters that push the story, that have relevance to the story. And I had more in the first couple of drafts, and I remember having lengthy conversations with my lead editor on it, that there were some characters that just didn't need to be there. Or what actually happened is we would sort of combine characters. So you would have, two characters that were essentially serving the same purpose. And then you would sort of combine them so you didn't have to, keep head hopping and keep explaining a little bit. And that did make the story a lot more efficient to read. I always think that new characters are exciting. You want to know about a new character and what they're going to do and how they're going to impact it. But they really have to deliver the goods at some point. I mean, they have to have a purpose in the story, or they really shouldn't be there. So there was that process of sort of leaving them out of it, or combining or editing them out. But it's one of my favorite parts of it. And now I'm developing characters for the third book that, there's some from the first and the second books carried forward, which is exciting because then you have this, you feel like you have more tools in the toolbox to, bring these narratives to life, because the narratives become more complicated and things like that. So it's always good to have more characters.
Right. That's an interesting line of thought, actually. Now, why did you specifically choose London for your book too? And more so, you based Simone in a boarding school. So, was there a specific reason behind
that? Well, in the first book, there's a reference to Claire and living in London. So that put her in London, and I knew that in the arc of the whole thing, she was going to be in London at some point. And I felt that was a really good starting point as she sort of gets out into the world. And it seemed plausible on a couple of different other components of the narrative. The Lafray patisseries are now being franchised and expanded. So London seemed like a natural to have one to be the first outside of Paris, which also conveniently puts them in London. So the father's there with Simone to some extent. So she's like completely by herself, but there's a little bit of a support built in there. But it also seemed, even looking at the cover here, it seemed like one that the audience would immediately gravitate to in terms of some awareness of what London is and how it's laid out and the parts of it. And there was, there's the private school thing, and there was all of these things. And the other thing is, it seems that people are always interested in royals. For some reason, we're interested in what these people, these royals in England are doing. So there's some infusion of that as well. So it seemed like it just all came together nicely, especially Claire, who's one of even though she's not really in a lot of the book, she's one of the central characters, or at least for the story action. So it seemed like a natural to go to London, because the story I started to write was not in London. It was all over like Central Europe and jumping around. I said, no, I need to ground it someplace, and London seemed like the best place to start.
Right. Now, since this is set in London, obviously in some way there had to be the Queen. The Queen had to feature in it, and I without giving away the details, I love the way you weaved in that royal visit. How much was this kind of a deliberate attempt on your part?
Well, it was certainly deliberate. There was no question about it. I felt that, having the Queen, that it raised the stakes of the whole thing. It made it seem like more of a grander sense of occasion, and it sort of had to be done. But I remember having some discussions with some of my friends from England who helped me with some of the research and stuff, and they said the Queen would never come to this. There's this no chance that the Queen of England is going to come to an opening of a patisserie. It's just never going to happen. I said, well, it's going to happen. So, we need to make it seem as plausible as possible. So we wrote in some things to make it seem like it was, or at least to an American, or I think most people outside of England would say, well, that certainly seems plausible. I mean, I try to make there's little things within my stories as balanced and as plausible as possible, and I think we did get away with it.
No, I think as a reader, I found that credible. Although initially, I did smile and I said, "Oh well, of course the queen has to be there," but then it did come across as being quite credible. That's why I said you weaved in the appearance very well into the plot.
Yeah, well,
Uh,
thank
Now, considering that you are an American, how do you feel about the British royalty? Are you excited, curious, enthusiastic, or skeptical?
I mean, it's funny. I mean, I don't follow it at all. I mean, they always appear to be in the news, for usually personal reasons. I mean, I think, when you look at what a lot of them actually do, they do a lot of really good things. I mean, they're usually ambassadors for these outreach projects and things like that, which I think are fantastic. And you don't normally hear much about that. You hear about their personal stumbles or things like that, which we're sort of a tabloid society where that's what we focus on, which is unfortunate. But it's clearly a part of their heritage, and it's kind of interesting to hear about it from time to time, but it doesn't really get my full attention, to be quite honest.
Right. May I request you to read from your favorite section of the book?
Right, so I was looking around a little bit, and there's some spoilers in here, so I wanted to stay away from that a little bit, but I think there's one paragraph, which is towards the beginning, I think sort of sets the stage for it, where you start to talk about, friendships and things getting messy in your adolescence, things getting complicated. So I was going to go ahead and read from, okay. All right, so here we go. The weighty complexes of my life would have proven excruciating without my best friend by my side. Davy and I were inseparable as always and spent most of our Saturdays exploring Paris. Twice we got our nails done, and in a moment of spontaneity, or perhaps weakness, we purchased boxes of coloring and dyed our hair bright red. She went first. Red for fall, she had exclaimed. The experiment was an unparalleled disaster, and our furious mothers had immediately marched us to Nana Le Salon to salvage our looks and our locks. Only last week had we started to be able to laugh about it. But that was how things always ended up with Vivi. She was the one person who made me feel safe and on edge at the same time, the one that made school tolerable and weekends exciting. Nothing could have come between us. At least that's what I had thought. But wait, the lights are dimming, that's my cue. So that's how the book sort of starts there to sort of preview, some possible complexities between the two. They're fast friends. They're at this age they're 12 years old, so they have a lot of formative years together. But things start to change and get a little bit messy. So that's one of the central themes to the whole story.
Right. I particularly found those moments between we and Simone. Some of those moments, yeah, very very touching, very appealing. I think you've handled the pathos very well there. The
Well,
kind of
thank you.
conflict that they have.
Right, and it's nice for you to say that because one of the nuances of the book is the V's adoption, which is a very sensitive subject to a lot of people, and I looked into that topic quite a bit in this because it'll come back into the story. It's a central part of the story, and that was one of the things that I wanted to make sure that felt authentic. That kids, one child being adopted, and any sense of abandonment or any sense of loss or anything like that, that got its time and got sort of fleshed out in a way that seemed authentic between kids of that age. So that was one of those touchy things that needed to be addressed, but I think we did okay with it.
Right, and the fact that she was part of the adventure this time, I think that added more, gave a kind of an impetus to her character as well.
Yeah, I think so. She definitely had to go to London for sure. And in the early drafting of it, her friend Harper went as well, which seemed a little cluttered. But Harper plays a much bigger role coming into the third book and forward. So it's one of those things of balancing that character interaction and which one is needed to push the narrative, and which one is needed to counterbalance or even elevate Simone, because she's the main character, she's the protagonist. So most of the central action revolves around her. So it's important to have that foil or that character that's with her that elevates her.
Fair enough. Now, I kind of know the answer to this one, but I'd rather hear it from you. What are you working on next, and where is Simone headed off to for her next adventure?
Right, so book 3, I'm writing it now, and I've gone through a more deliberate process, I would say. I mean, writers always talk about process, and the second book took a lot longer to edit than we had anticipated, but it was certainly worth the time to do so. And as we were doing that, there was a lot of thought put into the future actions, where there was a lot of things embedded into Red Wolves that are going to make sense or come more to light in the second and third books and moving forward in that. So there was a lot of time spent, even though a good bit of it didn't make its way into the book, at least you go through that exercise of thinking about it to set things up. So in the next book, a good part of it, she is in Mumbai, in India, which is exciting. I was considering a couple different places, but that seemed perfect for sort of the backdrop of what's going to be happening. So she'll be in different parts of Europe a little bit, and then she'll be in Mumbai for a healthy chunk of the third book. So right now I'm writing it. I've already done the summary, and I've already done a really pretty thick outline, much more than I did in the prior books. And now it's a process of just writing it, which takes me some time because I sort of sneak in when I'm going to be writing. And the other thing that I felt is, because I'm not a full-time writer, when I'm actually writing, I have to be efficient and I have to be effective, and I can't just sort of spitball stuff all the time and get nothing on the page. So now so when I'm writing now, it's with more intent. So I'm hoping to get it to my publisher by October, so we can start the process then. I think I'm on pace to do that. I'm probably going to lean on you, Asha, for some research of Mumbai, because I need some boots on the ground, just like I did in London as well. So I may be leaning on you for some inside knowledge there.
I would be more than happy, more than delighted to do that, and so exciting that Simone is coming all the way to Mumbai now, all the way to Bombay.
I think it's great. She's going to be all over the globe through the series of this, and it seemed like the natural spot for her to go next. So yeah, I'm excited about it. I've been doing some research on Mumbai, but it takes. You can't just watch an hour of different video to really get a sense of a place. To really write about it and to feel like you're there.
Enormous amount of energy in that city. It's absolutely amazing.
It looks fascinating. So anyway, she's going to be spending a good bit of her time in Mumbai. So that's book 3.
Great. Will be all the more keen to read book 3 now.
Yeah, great.
Okay. Now I also got to know. I read that you have already written. You've completed writing a graphic novel. That's wonderful. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So what happened was, when COVID first hit, or this, I guess, was the summer of 2020, we were all where we are. The rates were pretty high, so we were all staying close to home. We were going on vacation. Nobody was really socializing, and I was working on Red Wolves and reading a lot. I was reading, for whatever reason, I was occupying my time reading art copies of books from fellow authors, or books that looked interesting to me, because generally when I'm writing, I'm reading as well. I like to read a lot while I'm writing, especially in genre. But anyway, I was reading urban fantasy novels, which I normally don't read. That's usually not something I gravitate to, but I was reading several, and my mind just started clicking, on a certain possibility in terms of the storyline. And over the next year, I guess, I just kept developing it on a Google Doc, kept summarizing it, kept outlining it, and at some point I thought, this feels pictorial to me. I mean, it feels like like a comic book or graphic novels, which I don't have any familiarity with. I mean, I read a lot of them as a kid, but I don't as an adult, I just don't know. And went through the process of developing it into a graphic novel and hired an artist who did a bunch of the storyboards and stuff like that. And now it's currently out to a couple of publishing companies. I've had actually a pretty decent interest in it, but it just takes a while. In publishing, everything just takes 10 times longer than you would think it takes. It just takes forever. But I definitely want to do something on it. Now I'm considering maybe, initially it was supposed to be a novel. I was going to write it as a YA type novel. And now I'm thinking maybe I'll go back to that, or maybe, I don't know. It's just sort of hanging out there, but with the amount of time and effort I put into it, I definitely want to, finish it in some sort of form. So maybe it'll be a graphic novel, maybe it'll be a book, maybe it'll be something, in a couple of years I'll finally get out. But it was an interesting exercise for me because it was out of genre. It was more this urban fantasy and YA type stuff, which I grew to like quite a bit once I was actually immersed in doing it. And I really liked working on two projects at the same time. I felt I was more effective and efficient working on Red Wolves and this graphic novel as well. So it was
you worked concurrently on the two.
Yeah, and I still do. Now that I'm working on the third book, I go back to that other one a little bit and tweak it. You're always trying to, add motivations or add things. So for the graphic novel, I'll go back and work on that a little bit, and it helps. It helps me to sort of keep my enthusiasm for writing up. So moving between two projects, which I know some authors do, works well for me. So it's something I think I'm going to continue to do.
That's phenomenal. You're certainly extending your repertoire there and getting a graphic novel as well, right? Now as a writer, would you say it was easier to write a regular fiction as opposed to a graphic novel, or is it the other way
I don't know, because originally the working title for it is Soul 13. So initially it was being plotted out as a novel. So, which to me came really fast. I think I plotted it out in a couple of weeks, and then kept working on it and getting some input. And that it was really nice to do something else, to be quite honest, because I was so immersed in pushing Red Wolves over the line and getting it to my editor and all of that, dealing with beta readers and all this stuff. It was nice, kind of, pivoting to something that was completely different, that nobody was waiting for. There was no expectations for it. You just wrote it just because it was fun, and it would sort of, refuel the tanks to jump back on Red Wolves to try to finish that as well. So it was nice. But I did find, once I went through the process of trying to convert it to a graphic novel, that it's difficult, because what happens in the graphic novel, so much of the storyline and the action is conveyed through the art, right? So the writer is writing the dialogue, and they write these little sections where they talk about setting and things like that. So much of it has to be conveyed through the art, and the amount of dialogue is limited. You can't fill the whole page with dialogue, or then it'd be a book, right? So you have to be very precise in your dialogue, which is really challenging to pull that off. And it was a fun process. It's almost like a puzzle where you're trying to find that balance of dialogue and action. Does the action look right? And it is not easy, I would say that.
Yeah, I think it's harder to get fewer words and get them spot on, right? Being that much more concise and precise.
That is definitely true.
Right. Now with Simone Lafray being so immensely successful, what changes, if any, has it had on you as a writer?
I mean, as a writer, some things I think you start to feel, before we were chatting about this, you start to feel some stewardship for these characters and for the story. And I had plotted the whole thing out, I guess about 6 or 7 years ago. So I guess 6 years ago. So now I'm at the stage where I know how all the books start and end, and I know how it ends, and there's a definite end to it. But now I feel like, I have this greater responsibility to deliver these pretty solid books, and that there's an audience for these now, and they care. I mean, they care about Simone, and they care about what's going to happen with the Red Fox and all that kind of stuff. So it definitely gives you a greater sense of responsibility in your writing, which is kind of nice. I kind of like that pressure. If nobody cared, you could just kind of do whatever you wanted, but it feels like there's a greater sense of responsibility there. So in terms of a writer, and once you write more, you definitely feel more comfortable with the whole process of doing it. Some of your word choices and things like that. So yeah, it's good. It's a nice transition for me. It's a nice point in my life where I can write these books and get some recognition for them, and it's been great. I'm so happy that I wrote that short story that one evening, and then all these wonderful things have happened since. So if you're a writer out there and you get the inspiration, see it through. You never know.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal. I think that was a phenomenal moment in your life that it clicked, right? And then you.
It definitely clicked. Yeah, it was a neat moment, and it's fun. It's fun how it happened too. If I had just been sitting around, writing things, sketching things out and word blurbing, and then constructed something that thought, I think that's it. That would be one thing, but the spontaneity of it, there was something about it that just felt right, and I think that's part of the reason why I did write the short story at the start, because there was something about it that I just couldn't let go. And not that it hasn't been a lot of work, because it's been years and a lot of writing and drafting and correspondence with publishers and that whole world. So it's not that it's easy, but when you have the right inspiration, it makes it a lot easier, I would say.
True, fair enough. Now, what has been the best compliment so far? I know there have been multiple number of them, but then is there something that has particularly touched you, that has stayed with you?
Yeah, the best compliments for me, they generally come from, I've gotten compliments from kids, from that target audience, which you're always looking for, that have read the books really intently. And quite honestly, they ask me some questions from time to time that I don't quite know the answer to. Like, you write these and you get so immersed in them, you remember most of the things, but there's a couple of things from time to time that might slip your mind a little bit, and you're like, oh yeah, I remember that. But one of the best compliments I ever got was from a mom and daughter, that the daughter was having a bad day in particular, and she read the book, or they read the book over the weekend, and went outside of the house and did some things like that, and it was part of their sort of her getting back on course of having a better day. And I thought that was really cool. And then I've had responses from people that have known me my whole life that have said, I can't believe you wrote this book. It just doesn't, it's really good, and it just doesn't, for some reason, it was unexpected. And I think that's kind of fun, at this point in my life, to do something that's unexpected, and it's sort of a breath of fresh air is great. But no, I've had a lot of them, and I appreciate every single compliment I get on the book or books.
That's lovely. Now, as a writer, what do you think is your strongest point?
For me, definitely writing the settings. I think that's the easiest part for me, because in my career I write about real estate and place and describing buildings and things like that. So for me, that's the easiest for me to do. What I try to do in the books is I try to have a couple of emotional high points through the books, where it feels, where you feel something. You feel happy, or you feel sad, or you feel excited for one of the characters or something like that. So that part, you can only do a couple of them. You can only have a few of those real exclamation points, through the book to make the reader feel good about it. But I think I'm getting better at that. And also the character development, I think I'm getting better at that as well. But I think the one thing that I've trusted is, with all my ideas of writing books, I usually have a very definitive reaction of if it's good or it's bad. And if it's bad, I initially cut it. And if it's good, which is maybe only about 5% of the things, I'll continue to think about it. But I have a pretty good filter, I think, at least at the start, in terms of plotting ideas. That's a good question.
That's fantastic. Great to hear, and wish you lots more success. And I'm sure that each one of the books from the Lafray series would be as well received as the first one. I'm sure of that. All the best to you, Steve. And any special message for viewers of the Writer Talks?
No, I would just say if you're an inspiring writer, start now, start writing. It's going to take some time, and it's going to be one of the most gratifying things that you do. And find your voice, stay true to it, and keep searching for people that are going to champion your book. Because as I said earlier, not everyone's going to like your book, but when you put in enough work in it, and you do enough research, and trying to find people that are going to gravitate to your book, it'll pay off in the end, and it is so worth the ride.
Absolutely, completely agree with you. So great, thanks for coming back on the Writer Talks, and lots of success to you, and have a great day. Ahoy!
Thank you, Asha.